Is there anyone in the world who hasn't seen a Tom Hanks movie? He's one of the most bankable film stars in history because he's Hollywood's quintessential average Joe. And every man storms the beach at Normandy. And every man gets stranded on a desert island. And every man draws a cartoon mouse. Then 100 years later, we all have to put up with this. We've all seen Tom sitting on a park bench comparing life to a box of chocolates. We all remember Tom heroically telling Houston he has a problem. And everyone knows that scene where Tom sticks a stripper's sausage in a hot dog bun, then laughs uncontrollably as his mother-in-law is sexually assaulted.
I'm sorry, Wilson!
I'll bet you can name at least half a dozen Tom Hanks movies off the top of your head, but I wonder how many of you would name the greatest film he ever made.
Carol!
Directed by Joe Dante, The Burbs was released in February 1989 and tells the story of a group of neighbours who begin to suspect a new family on the block called the Klopeks might be serial killers. Following the success of Gremlins, Joe Dante was now a major Hollywood director, and there was huge buzz around the project. The studio loved Dana Olsen's script, they loved the team they'd put together. Corey Feldman's involvement in the movie even resulted in an on-set visit from Michael Jackson. Everything pointed to The Burbs becoming a runaway success, and you'll be pleased to know it was a massive hit for Hanks. Corey Feldman became an A-list leading man, Carrie Fisher finally got out of the shadow of Star Wars, and everyone lived happily ever after.
I wasn't amused by The Burbs. Tom Hanks seems smarter on screen than to suffer through this story. We wait for him to leap ahead, and the film's parody of suburban life is hardly original.
This movie is bankrupt of imagination. It goes nowhere. It uses a lot of special effects to no avail.
It is honestly beyond me why nobody appreciated this film for what it really was. It's like they were reviewing a completely different movie to the one Joe Dante made. The Burbs isn't a slapstick comedy. It's not a spoof. It's not even a black comedy, despite what the premise might suggest. The Burbs is a satire, and it's a brilliant one. It's beautifully written, intelligently directed, and the performances are superb.
God, I love this street.
Now, I completely accept that everything I'm about to say here is subjective, so if you've seen this movie and you hate it, that's fine. Idiots are welcome. Set somewhere in the American Midwest, the protagonist is Ray Peterson, a mild-mannered everyman who can't shake the feeling that there's something not right in the house next door. The Klopeks are a strange breed. They keep to themselves, only come out at night, and on the few occasions they do appear, they do nothing to allay suspicions. They're a bit like Kevin Spacey. You hardly ever see him these days, but when he does pop his head up, it's absolutely bone-chilling. Ray tries his best to ignore the Klopeks' eccentricities.
Sardine?
But with his other neighbours, Art and Rumsfeld, constantly egging him on like a bunch of schoolboys, he finds it impossible. Ray starts to watch the Klopeks more closely, and when an elderly neighbour goes missing, he resolves to find out the truth once and for all. But what makes The Burbs great satire? Satire is a reflection of real life. In the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had Dr. Strangelove, whilst Spinal Tap satirised the vanity, excess and pretensions of the rock and roll lifestyle. Typically, a satire makes fun of things the audience have recently lived through, or makes a prediction about the way the world is heading. The Burbs took on Reagan's America, suburban utopia, and their growing fear of outsiders.
What the hell is that? What do you say, John?
This rule follows from concept to character. Ray's just this normal guy trying to make his way in the world. He's like you and me. His wife is just like everybody else's wife. What man in the 1980s didn't want to be married to Carrie Fisher? I mean, she's She's smart and she bakes and she has good posture.
She's a babe. If she were a president, she'd be Abraham Lincoln.
The same is true of the casting. You cast the everyman as the everyman and the airhead as the airhead, and what you end up with is this feeling that you've been here before. Mayfield Place could be the street you grew up on. It's everybody's street, with the neighbours we all remember. Familiarity, see? Cast Tom Cruise instead of Tom Hanks and the audience will start to ask distracting questions. Tom Cruise's next door neighbours are behaving suspiciously. Why isn't he kicking in the door? Tom Cruise's crazy friend is firing a gun in the backyard. Why isn't he wrestling him to the ground? Tom Cruise is in bed with his wife. Why isn't she young enough to be his great-granddaughter? Like with all satire, everything in The Burbs is an exaggeration of real life. It's set on a typical suburban street in the USA, but how many streets have you seen that are this perfect looking? The flowers are beautiful. Every lawn is a work of art. It's like living in Stepford. If Mayfield Place is the most American street in the world, the Klopeks are the most un-American people that could possibly live there. They come from some undisclosed foreign country and their wreck of a house is bringing down the property values. They're mean-faced, extremely unfriendly, and seem to think the laws of society don't apply to them. Jerry Goldsmith's score brilliantly serves these extremes. Take the central theme as just one example. It's so light and idyllic, you could easily see it working in a Disney movie. Now contrast that with the introduction of the Klopeks. Is this a comedy movie or a horror movie? Light versus darkness. Perfect fairy tale.
Go on, boy. Fill these with water. Please.
As you wish.
Versus absolute horror show.
Believe me, I wish that I could just wish away my feelings. But I can't.
Subtlety in satire is paramount, and it's The Burbs' greatest strength, something that seems to have been completely overlooked by the brilliantly insightful people that reviewed it.
I laughed out loud several times. Every summer there has to be at least one raunchy food fight movie.
Yeah.
And Bachelor Party is this summer's best example of that.
Yeah, this guy. Whilst the setting of the movie is an exaggeration, the means by which that exaggeration is executed is very subtle. In the opening shot, we start high above the earth, then zoom down onto Mayfield Place. The story is set somewhere in Middle America, but it's never explicitly stated where. Joe Dante constantly riffs from classic horror movies as well, triggering that sense of familiarity, but he does it in a way we're not really aware. Then there's the clever choices in production design. The little things that help to sell the idea that we're in the heartland of the United States without beating us over the head with it. Rumsfeld wears a bullet necklace and has a mailbox made of shell casings. Then there's the implication that everyone buys in bulk. This is Costco country, where people pay companies to make sure the grass is always greener on their side of the fence. This subtlety extends to characterisation. Rumsfeld is an unapologetic patriot, but he's not a redneck. And Carol is a contented housewife, but she's not a pushover. These are archetypes, not stereotypes, and writer Dana Olson is smart enough to understand the difference. This plays out again in the stage directions. The spinning bike wheel, hinting at the repetitive nature of suburban life, then Ray angrily rejecting it, setting up his story arc without the audience consciously realising. We come back to this theme again near the end, when the wheel of the Klopeks car goes by, only this time in the opposite direction from the bike wheel. The Klopeks and the people of Mayfield Place are opposing forces of nature, and we see these little markers all the time. The cast are equally impressive in the subtle choices they make in their performances, with Henry Gibson and Carrie Fisher being the standouts for me. Henry Gibson plays the role of Dr. Werner like he's wearing an invisible straitjacket.
I thought the candles would be romantic for the lady.
He's got this weird, gentle charm, but at the same time, you're never quite sure if he's about to hand you a flower or stab you in the face. Then there's Carol's passive aggression towards Ray as she keeps putting pressure on him to leave the Klopeks alone. The way Carrie Fisher leans in here, allowing Tom Hanks to kiss her, not on the lips, but on the cheek. Nothing says, "I'm not putting up with your shenanigans" quite like this does. Or maybe this does. Now, you could argue that these things are more accident than they are design, but you could argue a lot of things.
This movie is a remarkable achievement, a marriage of imagination and special effects, and my thumb is up with a lot of admiration.
If I had to pick one example of every element coming together perfectly, it would be here, when the residents of Mayfield Place see Hans Klopek for the first time. The scene opens with Bonnie being ignored by her husband while he fixes the engine on a lawnmower. Ricky compliments Bonnie's tan lines, and across the street, Art leers at Bonnie's figure, while Ray shows off his fancy new tools. It's a man cliché we're all familiar with. Tools, engines, ignoring what women have to say, and constant perving. Just then, Hans walks out onto his porch to collect the morning paper, and everybody starts to stare. Then the music kicks in, and it's ridiculously over the top. What is Hans actually doing here that deserves such a bizarre reaction from his neighbours? The camera then switches position, so we see things from Hans's point of view, but because the music is composed from the point of view of the suspicious residents, it creates this comically uneasy feeling. It's subtly asking the audience to consider who should be afraid of who. It's a great scene and just one example of how good this movie really is. With all of this in mind, the question needs to be asked. Why did The Burbs fail so spectacularly when it was clearly a much better movie than people gave it credit for? Well, for one thing, there was a muddled marketing campaign. And what does a movie studio do when they don't know what to do? The tone of the film is hard to convey in a single image, and that's very apparent in the original movie poster. What does this image really tell the viewer about the sort of movie they're going to see? Is it about an escaped mental patient? Is he having a midnight barbecue? Over the years, the studio have made multiple attempts to rehash the artwork, never succeeding in getting it right.
It's like watching a bunch of retards trying to doorknob out there.
The trailer pitched the movie as some sort of screwball comedy instead of a satirical commentary on suburban utopia. Is it any wonder people felt let down when they came out of the movie theatre? It might also be fair to say that 1989 was the wrong time for a movie like The Burbs. It was the era of the action hero, and the USA A-OK factor was still very much prevalent in American culture. Who wants to sit down and watch a film satirising a way of life that for so many people was their ultimate ambition? America just wasn't in the mood for what this movie had to say. Maybe it would have been better if The Burbs had come out today, with the United States' growing mistrust of outsiders.
Now listen to next door neighbors. What is their name again? The Klopeks? Is that a Slavic name?
Political polarisation.
A soldier's way saves the day.
And people's unwillingness to accept that maybe, just maybe, other people are not the problem.
We're the lunatics! Us! It's not them!
It's us.
It's been 30 years since The Burbs was released, and Tom Hanks has gone on to have one of the most successful careers in Hollywood history. The failure of The Burbs in no way reflects the quality of the film. If anything, it's aged better than a lot of Tom Hanks' more successful movies. The people of Mayfield Place see themselves as the protectors of the American dream. The Burbs holds up a mirror and asks the question, who does it need protected from?
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor?